Morning. Really good to see you. There's a lot of faces here, a lot of visiting faces as well. It's just great to see you and great to spend some time together. I keep thinking that we need to either move the drums away from the wall or I need to lose some weight so that, it's always really difficult trying to extract yourself from there. Okay. It's great to be with you and spend some time together. If you don't know me, I'm Dan. I'm part of the team here. And as you've already been told, today I'm going to take this jacket off because otherwise I'm going to stand here with my hands in my pockets all day. Get rid of that. We've already heard that today is, I've still got my hands in my pockets, is the harvest service. All right, Paul. We're looking at harvest, and I'm not sure how this came about, whether we chose today for harvest because I was speaking or the other way around, but either way, we've got a farmer speaking on harvest, which should be handy, I suppose. Even so, as a farmer, to be honest, I struggle with the idea of having a harvest service at church, and that might be a bit controversial, but we have Christmas, Jesus comes to earth, we have Palm Sunday, we have Easter Sunday, we have Pentecost, and all the festivals and the things that we celebrate tend to be about Jesus on earth and the things that he did. Whereas harvest, I think it was maybe because I can remember the chapel that I grew up in, there would be, suddenly you go to chapel and on the table there'd be all this fresh fruit and vegetables and sheaves and someone would bake a big loaf, and then at school we would walk in with a tin of beans, yeah, thanks. And but I want to make the argument this morning that despite lots of us not having a huge connection with food and where our food comes from, harvest is actually really still very important to all of us in the physical sense and in the spiritual sense. In the physical sense, if the harvest is poor, food security becomes an issue. So prices might go up in the shop a bit, things might become a bit scarce, you might not be able to have smashed avocado toast every day, you might just have to cut down on stuff. For others in the world, it's really a very different story, and we don't have to look far to see those that are suffering from starvation. There's a slide that's got some figures on it, if we can have it, please, Samuel. Yeah, so right now in the world, facing extreme hunger, there's over 23 million people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Struggle to get that out. There's 12.4 million in Afghanistan, 17 million in Yemen, 12.9 million in Syria, and many millions others that are people that don't know where their next meal's coming from. We're so blessed and so fortunate here, and sometimes we can get disconnected from that. Yet at the same time, we've heard this morning from Sarah, with transforming lives, there is hunger and there is poverty right outside our door. It's all around us. So in the physical sense, harvest, it really is relevant to all of us. And therefore, it's really important to appreciate how blessed we are and give thanks to God for his provision. So we're looking at harvest. Next slide, please, Sam. In the Bible, in the NIV version, let's go with the NIV, harvest is mentioned 87 times. There 66 times it's mentioned in the Old Testament, 21 times it's mentioned in the New Testament, and 13 times Jesus said it. So it should be an important topic to us because it was important to Jesus. It was important in the Bible. Just a note on these slides, they're rubbish. I've never used PowerPoint ever in my life. And at 12 o'clock last night, I thought, I'm going to do some slides. It's going to be great. But I forget that we've got Chris, who is a whiz at PowerPoint, and he can make them do twirly bits and stuff. So mine are really rubbish, but I just thought if we put something up there now and then, you haven't got to look at me the whole time. That was my thinking. Right, harvest. This year in the UK has not been a particularly easy one. In fact, it's still ongoing. You might be interested, you might not be, but I'm going to give you an update anyway. Hay harvest. The hay harvest this year was not really very good. Crops were light. Trying to get the right weather to make some hay at the right time of year was pretty tricky. So Sarah had to work with a pretty grumpy Dan quite often whilst I was thinking, I'm going to go mowing, no, I'm not going mowing, I'm going mowing, I'm not going mowing. I just can't believe how we can't get the weather forecast right in this day and age when we can do so much other stuff. So hay was tricky. Grain harvest was also a bit tricky due to the weather, and yields were poor this year because of the really wet autumn we had last year. I know we're having a wet one now, but last year was really hard, and therefore a lot of crops didn't get sown. And so yields are down, and it's been hard work. Potato and veg, we're all right for potato and veg. There's plenty of that out there, so fill your boots. Fodder beet, sugar beet, maize, that's what's still happening right now. And again, yields are down because of the cold, wet spring that delayed the planting. And to compound that, trying to get the crops out now is a little bit tricky. No doubt you've probably come across a little bit of mud on the road. I'll just say sorry about that. A few people have said, I'm late because I was stuck behind a tractor. There's loads going on. You've all seen it. It's hard work. We're getting there. Personally, I haven't actually been too involved. As I said, we make a little bit of hay, but when it comes to actually harvesting crops, I don't tend to get too much into it. Although this week I've twice been called out, emergency Dan, once to clean off some mud on the road that they brought out harvesting maize in Foldhill Lane over on the edge of Martock. And then another time I got called out because a trailer had slid off this really muddy road into a ditch. We've got a picture of that. I don't know if that'll show up. It's so that was a concrete track, and to be honest, I think the bloke was on his phone. But it wasn't helped by it was being muddy and slippery, so he fell in the ditch and we had to go and dig him out. But yeah, it was quite a fun job, really, if I'm totally honest. Okay. Henry often calls me a borosaurus, and so I'll stop talking about farming. Try not to bore you too much. After all that, getting into what we're going to look at this morning, the passage that I've been led to talk about doesn't actually mention the word harvest. Just thought I'd let you know that. There's loads that do, but this one I felt was important to read this morning, and it's the parable of the sower. And I've chosen to read it from the book of Mark. We'll go there now, I think, if that's all right. So although it doesn't mention harvest, the word, it does talk about harvest later on. But what's really important to remember is that if you want to harvest, you need to sow some stuff. So it's pretty critical to harvest. So I'm going to read from Mark chapter 4, starting at verse 1. Once again, Jesus began teaching by the lakeshore. There was such a large crowd along the shore that he got into a boat and sat down and spoke from there. He began to teach the people by telling many stories such as this one. Listen, a farmer went out to plant some seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The plant sprang up quickly, but it soon wilted beneath the hot sun and died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. Other seed fell among thorns that shot up and choked out the tender blades, so that it produced no grain. Still other seed fell on fertile soil and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted. Then he said, anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand. Later, when Jesus was alone with the 12 disciples and with the others who were gathered around, they asked him, what do your stories mean? He replied, you are permitted to understand the secret about the kingdom of God, but I'm using these stories to conceal everything about it from outsiders, so that the scriptures might be fulfilled. They see what I do, but they don't perceive its meaning. They hear my words, but they don't understand, so they will not turn from their sins and be forgiven. But if you can't understand this story, how will you understand all the others I'm going to tell? The farmer I talked about is the one who brings God's message to others. The seed that fell on the hard path represents those who hear the message, but then Satan comes at once and takes it away from them. The rocky soil represents those who hear the message and receive it with joy. But like young plants in such soil, their roots don't go very deep. At first they get along fine, but they wilt as soon as they have problems or are persecuted, because they believe the word. The thorny ground represents those who hear and accept the good news, But all too quickly, the message is crowded out by the cares of this life, the lure of wealth, and the desire for nice things, so no crop is produced. But the good soil represents those who hear and accept God's message and produce a huge harvest, 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. I like reading it in Mark because it's short and snappy, but it still was quite a long reading. Okay, so we live in an agricultural area, but we've already mentioned relatively few of us are actually involved in some sort of food production. I don't actually produce loads myself. We have got quite a few keen gardeners around. We've got a good farm vet. I say good, I'm pretty sure he's a good farm vet. So he's involved in farm production. We've even got our own resident pig farmer in Henry up the pigs. Other than that, most of us are in other work, so we don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about cows and crops like I do. That wasn't the case here. These guys on the shore, early in the chapter 4, Mark tells us that the crowds he was speaking to had come from all over. So they were gathered around at the shore of Lake Galilee from all over the place. There would have been loads of professions and trades represented, but a large proportion at that time and in that area would have been involved with farming in some way. So even if they weren't directly involved, they would have had a much more of an awareness of food and where it comes from and how it's produced than the guys that were doing it. There's even a chance, I think, that whilst Jesus was in his boat preaching to these guys sat on the shore, there's a chance that people were actually sowing seeds like this. So what Jesus was describing, they could have been seeing happen around them at the same time that would really bring it to life. And that's why Jesus quite often spoke in parables, because it was a way of getting people to connect with the message that he's trying to get across to them. I can remember sitting in school, hearing the teacher droning on about something or other, and I was like more interested in what was going on out the window. After school, I went to agricultural college, and suddenly I was interested in what was being taught. So like in the June, I was having maths lessons where it just was like not caring, not interested. A few months later, in September, I was using those same calculations and same formulas to work out fertilizer recommendations, something that really gets me going. So that's what is happening here. Jesus is talking in parables so that people can connect with it, because it's connecting with what's going on in their life, what's going on around them, what they're up to. Let's just be clear. Jesus, in this bit, I think, is teaching about how the gospel, the message of Jesus, is received by different people. And he was teaching in a way that people at that time could relate to. So the farmer represents Jesus. It can also represent the evangelist, or you and I, when we're looking at how we can share the message of Jesus with us. The seed represents the word of God, the message of Jesus Christ to the world. The soil represents those who hear the gospel, the message of Jesus Christ. It represents the hearts of the people that hear it. So those guys that, in listening to Jesus in his boat, knew what it was like to broadcast seed around their fields. They knew that some were going to land in the path, and some would land in the rocks, and some would land in the thorns, and some would land in the decent soil. And they knew about pests and weeds and diseases and things like that. I often think actually that this parable should be called Parable of the Soil rather than the sower, because it tends to stick with the soil, but I'm not going to rewrite the Bible. So, what I want us to focus on this morning are those 4 types of soil mentioned in the parable. So there's a slide, I think, that says that. So we've got the first soil, which is the path of the hard ground. The second type of soil is a stony ground. The third type of soil is a thorny ground. And fourth and final and good one is the good soil. As we go through these, we won't spend ages on them, we'll just flip through them. But as we do, try and think about which soil you might have in your heart, the type of soil that you would like to have in your heart, and about those around you and friends that you might have shared the gospel with, and you'll probably be able to see this in action. So soil number 1. Next slide. In Mark 4, verse 4, it says, "As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up." The soil of the path, or the hard ground, is pretty straightforward, really. When you plant wheat, to get good germination, you need to get good seed to soil contact. It's got to be covered over and compact, or not compact, firm, and it will grow. So to ensure this, when we drill it, so drilling is another word for sowing, when we drill wheat, we quite often have on the back of the drill some fingers that are like a harrow that pulls through the soil, covers it over, and then quite often we go through and roll it afterwards and just firm it all up. That's so that we can get good germination. What you don't want is the seed to be left open to the elements on top of hard, compacted ground, because if you do that, it either gets eaten by the birds, as we hear, or it doesn't germinate, or as we have a bit more rain and suddenly it's washed away, gone. Verse 15, next slide, says, "Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them." We all know people that have heard about Jesus, but they just don't want to know. They laugh and joke and they think we're nuts. As a farmer, I can't help asking, why on earth this farmer is chucking seed on path? Makes no economic sense whatsoever. But sometimes when we do drop a bit of seed on a hard place or on unworked soil or compacted ground, sometimes get one that grows. Sometimes it goes all the way through to harvest. Doesn't always produce very much, but it still grows and still gets to harvest. It's not up to us to decide who should hear about Jesus and who shouldn't. We're just entrusted to go out and share our faith with everyone. It's easy to decide there's no point telling Fred down the pub about Jesus because he won't be interested. We just live in a life as Christians and followers of Jesus. It should just ooze out of us. It'll be wrong to say, I'm not going to tell someone because I don't think he'll listen. And it's quite easy to make that mistake. Okay, soil number 2. Next slide, verse 5. "Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root." Now, at risk of being a Borosaurus again, I'm going to talk to you about soils around here. We're surrounded by Yeovil Sands. Some of you might have heard of Yeovil Sands. It's the reason we've got a lot of potato growers and veg growers around here. It's really nice, good soil. It's light, it's easy working, stone free. Not all of it's like that, but around here there's quite a lot, and farmers know that as boys' ground. On our old farm, where we used to farm down at Elminster, that was really heavy, wet, strong clay. That was known as man's ground. So we'd always say, oh, he's on boys' ground, he's got life easy. So what we don't have a lot of around here is really stony soil. If you drop down to Dorchester, it gets a bit stony and brashy. Up in the Cotswolds, they would be the nearest places I'd say that have got stony soil to us everywhere. It's just all over the place. Stony soil is usually very free draining and tends to dry out very quickly, and so in a drought, yields are massively affected. Verse 16, next slide, says, "Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away." You might know people like this. You might even have been like this yourself. Sometimes people can get swept up in emotion, say a prayer at a Christian music concert. You could go to a tent meeting and the preacher would do an altar call, and you rush up and somebody might rush up and, say a prayer and make a commitment. And then a few days, months, weeks later, back at work, back in with the old crowd, that commitment can sometimes be forgotten or be not be important. We've seen it happen before. I'm not going to get into the whole once saved, always saved argument. I don't think that's relevant here, and I don't think it's clear-cut either. But what is relevant is our actions in that situation. So we talked about stony soils. Stony soils are still farmed. Like, farmers still plant seed year in, year out on stony soils. It costs a bit more. It's harder work. It's harder work on your machines. It sometimes uses more nutrients. Sometimes it causes problems with irrigation and things like that. But they still plant it, and you can still get a crop off of it. Again, it's our duty to sow the word everywhere, even to those people who might appear likely to have stony soil for hearts. But through friendship, fellowship, discipleship, those people that hear the word, make a commitment with our help, can grow in the faith, can get to heaven and stay strong Christians and help other people to come to know him. Right, soil number 3. This is a bit of a tough one, really. This is the soil that out of the first 3 worries me the most, because we're all susceptible to this. So verse 7 says, other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear grain. One of my day jobs, got a few of them, is I'm a spray contractor to lots of farmers in the area. So an agronomist would go and look at the Mr. Farmer's crop, decide that it needs spraying for whatever reason, weeds, disease, pests. He would send a recommendation to me and the chemicals to me, and then I would go out and apply it. It's all licensed and legal and very strict and all controlled. But that is one of my jobs that's pretty important for food production. What always amazes me, and the gardeners in the room will know this, is just how quick weeds can take over a crop. 1 minute you can plant your seeds and they come up nice little rows and they look great in the garden, and there's nice brown, peaty, lovely soil all around them, and just your plants are growing. The next day you go out, there is a blanket of seedlings everywhere, all over the place, just suddenly appeared. Like, if you don't do something about that, your crop's going to struggle. It will disappear. It will become smothered. And when a crop is smothered like that with weeds, it's competing for light, it's competing for moisture, it's competing for nutrients and space. We've got to do something about it. Verse 18, next slide, says, still others, like seeds sown among thorns, hear the word. But the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. As I said, this can happen to any of us at any point in our walk through life. And it's why it's the soil type that worries me most. We can think we've got it all sorted. We can think, yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church, I go to a home group, I read the Bible, yeah, I've got it sorted, I'm going to heaven. And then bang, out of nowhere, we realise we're wrapped up in some, I don't know, just strife. It could be at work, it could be financial difficulties, it could be we've got into drugs or alcohol, drinking, addictions, anything. We're all susceptible, none of us are immune to that. The verse is quite clear that we can be caught by worries, deceitfulness, desires, and other things. We've always got to be on our guard, watching out that we don't get led astray. How do we do that? Next slide, Ephesians 4. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. A bit later in Ephesians 6, next slide, it says, therefore put on the full armour of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. It's so important to act on this. None of us are immune to the pulls and the drags of the world, but each of us does have constant access to that, the toolkit that will enable us to remain in Christ and remain fruitful. What's fruitfulness? Next slide is Galatians 5. Been hearing about this a lot lately, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Okay, lastly, soil number 4. Verse 8, next slide. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. This is the good stuff. This is where you want to put your seed. This is what you want your heart to be like. I said we've got some good soil around here, but generally regarded as the very best soils would be the peaty, silty, fen soils in like East Anglia, which is why lots of our veg is grown in Lincolnshire and the fens around there. In those soils, I won't say it is easy, but it becomes almost easy to grow a really high yielding good crop. They're blessed over there with that soil. That is really boys' ground. I said earlier that the crowds listening to Jesus tell this parable would be able to relate because it was going on around them and they knew about it. I don't actually think that's the case with this soil. So let's take wheat grown this year in Somerset. An average crop, good crop this year would have been sort of yielded 2.5 to 3 tons per acre, right? The seed rate would be 180, 200 kilos a hectare, which is about 75 kilos an acre. So you plant, last October they would have planted 75 kilos an acre of wheat seed. And then in August this year, they should have harvested 2,750 kilos of wheat. That is 36.6 times what was sown. Generally, in a better year, we'd be hoping for 40 times. In August, Sarah and I took the girls to Cyprus. Sarah will tell you that you can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy. So I tend to do a lot of farming on my travels, looking over the hedge, not where I'm meant to be driving, and I was driving around like that. And Cyprus, where we weren't actually a million miles from where this parable was taking place. And the crops had all been harvested, but I could see by the straw that was left, and it was baled up, you can sort of get a feel for what that crop would have produced. And looking at the straw, those guys would not have got 36.6 times what they're sowing. It would have been more like 15 times what they'd sown. And if you go backwards in time to when the parable was written, in that climate and in that area, without the access to the varieties of seed and the fertilizers and chemicals that we've got now, I think that, I don't know this for sure, but I'd be very surprised if they got much more than 15 times what they planted back then. So here's Jesus talking about 30, 40, what does he actually say? 60, is it? Yeah, 30, 60, 100 times what they planted. That is just like fantastical. Those guys must have been thinking, what's this bloke talking about? Like that, you can't plant that much seed and get 100 times back. It's just crazy. I think it's crazy. That would mean we have a crop of wheat producing 7.5 ton an acre. Be quite nice, but that's our God. Graham keeps saying to it, I hear him saying all the time, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and he does. God is big, he works in big numbers, and he blesses. It's really exciting to think that, God can take something so small and multiply into something so massive, and he does it all the time. The parable shows us that when the word of God is received into a fertile and ready life, it will produce fruit, and it can produce way more than we can imagine. We've already remembered what the fruit of the Spirit is: love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Can we see that fruit in our lives? And if not, what are we going to do about it? I'm close to finishing up, but I just wanted a little footnote about soils, that you can improve soils. Hard, compacted soils like the path, you can put a machine through it with legs that rips it and breaks it and loosens it. There's machines, I was watching a video, I get all sorts of machinery flashing up on my Facebook feed, and yesterday there was this massive machine that you drive along and it gathers up all the stones on really stony soil I'm talking about, and it picks it up, filters it, drops the soil back out, chucks the stones in a hopper behind. So it removes the stones from the field. So you wouldn't be avoiding stony ground like they did back then. You can improve the soil by taking the stones out of it. We've talked about spraying. So, with thorny ground, weedy ground, you can clean that up through either chemicals or rotation or cultivations. Soils can be improved. Just thought I'd point that out. I am done, but I want to leave you with a word of encouragement. I think it's possible to see that at different times and in different places, each of those soils are evident or have been evident in my own heart. There are times when it's hard to God. There are times when I've not had deep roots. There's been times when I'm overwhelmed by life, and then I end up not giving God a lot of room. And there are times when I feel like I've got it together and I've got the good stuff and God can do something. I'm no evangelist. Don't ever claim to be. You might be the same. Some people just have a real gift for it. Others don't. Doesn't mean we can't tell people about Jesus. And I really struggle to talk to people, friends even, well, especially friends that aren't Christians. I really struggle to share about Jesus. They know I'm a Christian. They know who I am. They know what I'm about. In fact, last night, a mate texted me and he said, "Can you come for a pint?" And I was like, I was preparing for this. So I was like, I could just say no. So I said, "No, I'm writing a message. I'm speaking at church tomorrow." He said, "I'll put it in chat GPT, let AI do it and just come on out." I didn't do that. I didn't think about it for very long either. Last Sunday, Henry and I, we skived MCF. We did go to church, but we just didn't come here. We went to Salisbury Baptist Church to a baptism of a friend of mine. So this chap's called Dan, and I used to work with him and mess around with him 25 years ago, back in the village where I grew up. He knew I was a Christian. We had a few conversations and chats about stuff, but I wasn't a very good witness. And just before the service on Sunday, he came over and said hello, and I apologised because I said to him, I wasn't a good witness to you because we got up to stuff that I'm ashamed of now at the time. But what is interesting, and I'm not telling you this because I'm blowing my own trumpet at all, it's not about what I did, but it's about planting the seed. So although I was not a very good witness, we still had conversations about Jesus, and that was one of many seeds sown in his life. Loads of other people have sown lots of seeds, and now it's come to fruition. Now he's stepped out, he's become a Christian, he's got baptised, and he's going on with Jesus. I was just completely bowled over and blown away by it, really, that God can use us no matter, even if we give him a tiny little bit, he can still turn that into something amazing. Yeah, I am finished. What I'm trying to get across is that it's really important that we just sow the message of Jesus into those around us by the way we live. Our responsibility isn't to worry about the places that we share it and the soils that it might go into. Our responsibility is just to share it and live it. Thank you. You've been great listeners.